The reason I have such a small section on books is because books in the open access environment are still, let us say, nascent. But books are important. And therefore, I wanted to have two distinguished speakers going on this, and I hand-picked them. Where's my other hand-picked one? Thank you. And Martin is somebody I have heard speak before, so I know he won't talk all the time about how important open access is. I'm going to talk about the other things downstream, as it were. So, okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Is this microphone working? Everyone hear me okay? Great, thank you. My name is Martin Eve. I'm a lecturer in English at the University of Lincoln, and from next year a senior lecturer in literature at Birkbeck College. I'm going to talk about monographs and open access and the challenges posed there, primarily in the humanities disciplines. I'm specifically referring to research monographs here because the economics for textbooks and other form of book, like critical editions, are so distant from the research monograph as to make it impossible to speak of them under the same bracket. I can talk about textbook economics and open access and open education more broadly at the end if people would like. So I appreciate it's a bit weird. I'm at an STM event talking about monographs. Some STEM subjects, as far as I'm aware, do have the research monograph, but they're generally less highly valued than in the humanities. For those who don't know, in the humanities, the monograph is the unit of accreditation. If you want a job, you write a monograph, and the promotion ladder follows that step by step. If you're interested in what I say today, by the way, this is my only plug. I just have a book out with Cambridge University Press that is open access, called Open Access and the Humanities, Context, Controversies in the Future. So you can either download a copy or you can buy one, and my royalties go to Arthritis Research UK. So there you are, there's your lure. Okay, so I'm going to... Sorry, there is a print copy that you can buy, 12 quid.
Oh, well, I
There you go. I'm going to talk today, this is just a zoomed out overview across several areas. I'm going to talk about the objections and controversies that have been met when we've talked about open access for humanities monographs. I'm going to talk about why we should think of the monograph differently. I'm going to talk about the current experiments that are underway and the results that are available to us. And lastly, I'm going to talk about business models for open access monographs. So first of all, it's worth saying, as I intimated in my comment earlier, that we've seen various levels of resistance from humanities researchers across the board to open access. Sometimes these are based on misunderstandings and misconceptions. For example, it is still common in humanities departments for the green-gold distinction to be obliterated in favour just of APCs mean open access. This has caused a lot of problems, but we do see hope because actually there was a time in STEM disciplines where that same misconception circulated. We still see in humanities disciplines the concerns over quality control and open access venues, and the same for books. Primarily though, these critiques can be divided by stakeholder, and I'm just going to quickly enumerate some of those so we're aware of the challenges faced in various spheres. Some of these I take more seriously than others. So first of all, researchers. Well, good luck talking about open access books with most humanities researchers. Some object to the principle in its entirety of open access, Robin Osborne being the most pronounced opponent of this. Osborne claims that humanities research is a specific type of undertaking that is not akin to a database of facts, which is how he characterises science. Now, I don't take his characterisation of science as true there. Actually, he seems to ignore the elements of mediation and process that go into the production of scientific knowledge and the continual revalidation of that. But nonetheless, he tries to draw a distinction and thinks that dissemination on the internet for anyone who is unqualified to read the results doesn't work. We've heard that before elsewhere. It doesn't wash. We've seen concerns over open licensing that perhaps tie in with what was said earlier about inclusion of secondary material. We also know, though, that the Creative Commons licenses allow us to exclude third-party material from that license. And if we're using formats that are not tightly bound in one container format, like the PDF, that exclusion becomes all the more viable. So John Holmwood's concerns in this respect are perhaps the ones to investigate if you're interested in those challenges. But last of all, I'll say researchers are generally opposed to the APC and BPC, book processing charge, models in the humanities. We have that problem of a risk pool I talked about and the localised points of pressure. So I'll talk about what some of those levels of charge are later, but but essentially no one I know who isn't funded by the Wellcome Trust can afford to do this. Commercial publishers have some qualms about open access books unless you can stump up a BPC fully in advance. Profits and sustainability, however you want to think of that, are a primary concern in this area, and we know that the rhetoric of crisis has surrounded the monograph for around 40 years. We typically see sales runs of 200 to 250 copies, declining, although different companies have different business models for this. So some will focus on a list with bigger runs, others will focus on a broader list with smaller runs for each copy. But essentially they're trying to work out across the list how you make a return to subsidise the labour and fuel either surplus or profit in each case. But not all publishers are the same. We have learned society publishers and university presses who share these financial concerns, but also the academic concerns over integrity, concerns over plagiarism that keep coming up and I think are misplaced, etc. Librarians, on the other hand, from the perspective that I've got, are mostly keen. And that's because of the material stress that's been put on the library since 1986 from those ARL statistics that I'm sure we're all familiar with. The monograph economic ecosystem can't be separated from the serials crisis. Every time we spend money on serial subscriptions, we can't buy monographs, and so you can't think of these as separate areas of library budgets and independent economic entities. In fact, it's not even a good idea to separate STEM from humanities when you're thinking in budgetary terms, because within institutions, they're playing a game of balancing, and it's a zero-sum game at the end. So it's worth saying that's the kind of ecosystem. Of course, there are some librarians who share the concerns about quality in the open access sphere. We can talk about Jeffrey Beale afterwards if anyone would like to. I have thoughts.
Waste of time.
Okay, so why is a monograph different? Surely we're just talking about 80,000 words as opposed to 8,000. Can't we just scale the economics slightly? Well, yes and no. There's a commensurately higher degree of labour in the production of a monograph than a research article that also has something to do with the type of work that is presented in the humanities disciplines. So, although I don't want to draw false distinctions between science and the humanities, often we're looking at the crafting of an argument. What's the data in certain types of humanities publication? Well, actually, the analysis itself is what we're valuing. And an editorial input into that process can be extremely valued, but comes with economic costs that perhaps aren't present in certain forms of scientific publishing. We also know, though, that funders are thinking about this intensely. HEFCE excludes monographs and book chapters from its 2020 mandate. I'll talk shortly about the HEFCE Open Access Monographs Expert Reference Panel group that are due to release a report shortly. But the monograph sphere is also different in other ways. And the first way it's different is that there is a much higher barrier to entry for new publishers in this space. And what I mean by that, primarily in this instance, is that no humanities researcher has a second monograph sitting in their drawer that they can give out of altruism to a new open access startup or whatever they might do in a journal sphere if they were keen on that phenomenon. The things take 3 to 5 years to produce. They are key to the researcher's progression on the career ladder, so they have real material knock-on effects in that accreditation sphere. And so, therefore, they tend to go back to the same publishers. This makes it incumbent on existing publishers with strong reputational bases to effect change. Now, we know that those entities often have material concerns about economics that sit poorly with what we know in terms of an evidence base for open access books. So we've got a catch-22 situation where we're dependent on entities who find it hard to experiment because they have precarious economics often and are trapped in those cycles. We also know, though, that open source platforms for monographs are in their infancy. Open Journal Systems has been going for a long while now and is a very mature piece of software, even if flawed in various ways. Its counterpart, Open Monograph Press, that might allow those who wanted to try and disintermediate or disrupt, for that horrible term, existing entities, just isn't there yet. Likewise, there's no open source production toolchain. It's very hard to get on top of XML typesetting if you don't have the money to pay for a copy of Xstyles. It's very hard to figure out how the aggregation channels work. Different intermediaries pose challenges as well here. Consider this, Amazon price matches down to 0 on digital editions. So if you give away a PDF and you want to sell a Kindle version, which surprisingly actually works, you may not be able to if someone reports it, because Amazon will say there's a free copy in a digital version, so all digital versions cannot be sold. That's another revenue channel out the window. And last but not least, there are different discoverability and value conferral sites for the monograph. Simply putting a PDF online, well, we're not going to do that anyway because we know about discoverability problems and preservation and so forth, but simply having a digital copy in one form is often not enough for the forms we're talking about. The public, for example, if we want to reach the public in the field of popular history, the way we need to do that is to get into a bookshop with a TV show, radio tie-in, or whatever. That's not to say that can't be symbiotic with open access forms, but there are expectations of quality that are linked at the moment to finance, placement, and particular spaces of value, like the bookshop. Print, as well, still seems to confer value in most researcher surveys, even if we know that that's nonsense and you can produce print from the digital-first workflow. So a lot of social and economic challenges circulating here. However, because we've seen strong mandates emerging for journals, funders in particular know that there is an imperative to work on what we can do for books. At the moment, there's been extreme caution, and Wellcome is the only funder with a really, really strong mandate for books, but they'll pay for you to do it, so you're not in any trouble with it. The key experiments to date have been the OAPEN-NL study, the OAPEN UK study, and the HEFKey Monograph project. There are various stateside initiatives underway that I'll mention in passing as well. So for those who don't know, the OAPEN-NL project, which finished in 2013, returned data from a load of Dutch presses that I can't pronounce the names of, Springer, Techne Press, and many others, Amsterdam University Press being the press that proposed this. I'm not even going to try and pronounce some of the Dutch publisher names that were there, I apologise. They published 50 books with a total expenditure of almost €240,000. With a maximum of €5,000 paid per book to each publisher. And the idea here was to match two sets of books. So you make one set open access and you make the other just the traditionally marketed sales effort. A fairly small sample set, as you can see, but in 2013 they concluded that no significant effect could be found on monograph sales. So they're saying that actually there was no difference in the sales profile between the ones that were made open access and the ones that were just sold traditionally. There's a variety of reasons why that might be the case that I'll talk about shortly. There was, however, a significant increase in digital usage. The number of times the book was viewed on Google Books was exponentially greater for the open access editions. But that doesn't mean much, it's a crude metric, but at the same time it shows us something about access. There was no observed citation benefit, though, to open access books from that study, which contradicts many of the meta-surveys from the journal sphere. That could be because the half-life of an academic book is much longer than a journal article, so therefore maybe the study just didn't run for long enough, and they're due to review the citation findings in the near future. So OAPEN UK extends that, and is a survey that's underway at the moment, and it has a larger sample set of 90 titles. And they've tried to do two matched groups here. So they've tried to find similar titles in many ways, and they've said, okay, let's look at career stage, subject area, length of titles, approximate retail price that was anticipated, etc., and match these pairs against one another. And they've got a range of publishers involved: Routledge, University of Wales Press, Liverpool University Press, Palgrave, Berg, and Oxford University Press in that study. The disciplinary range spans criminal law, classics, literature, and history, through to marketing, among many others, so quite a liberal definition of what humanities might be there. That survey is still running, and so we can't release any results from it yet, but in the near future, next year, there should be some results available that will give us closer ANOVA statistic-based analysis of whether open access changes the sales ratio. Now, it's worth saying that one of the problems here is discoverability of open access monographs. If researchers and purchasing librarians aren't aware that there's an open access version, then the sales statistics might be skewed, and it might all change tomorrow if suddenly this was massively well integrated into discoverability and purchasing catalogues. Maybe they're just buying it because they don't know that it's free. The alternative way of thinking about that, though, is that if that's the stance we take, no evidence we gather today will be enough to try things for tomorrow. If you're going to say everything could change tomorrow, then you won't accept any evidence and no study has any validity. So we have to go somewhere between caution at these results and the positive outcomes we've seen so far being indicators that this might work. And last but not least, HEFKey has been putting together a panel led by Jeff Crossick, a distinguished professor of history and ex-vice chancellor of the University of London, to investigate what should be done for a post-2020 ref in the United Kingdom with respect to books. That report is due out in January, and I'm afraid I can't tell you the inside info I have. It's not going to be as shocking as Finch is what I'll say, or even the HEFKey policy at the moment, but it is a detailed consideration of the landscape, and I'd urge anyone interested to look out for that when it comes out in the near future. Okay, so in my remaining few minutes, I just want to talk about the potential models we have to support the economics of open access monograph publishing. And there are a range of ways we can do this. The first is the book processing charge, which is dreaded by academics, as I said. And current rates vary from $2,450 per chapter from De Gruyter, €640 per chapter from Intec, £5,900 from Manchester University Press for books of up to 80,000 words, £11,000 from Palgrave, and approximately $15,000 from euros from Springer. So quite a wide variety there. Ubiquity Press, where Brian was here earlier, tries to peg that much lower. We're wary about races to the bottom in all this discourse. We need to find ways of making this sustainable, but I think Brian puts the figure at about £3,000 for a book. Print subsidy is the other way we might make this work. At present, the way that academics read books is quite interesting. You can tell an academic in a bookshop because they take a book off the shelf and they go straight to the back. And that's because they're looking for their own name in the index, the names of the other people they know should be in the index, and working out whether they need to read this. And Jeff Builder calls these reading avoidance techniques. There's a lot of reading avoidance that goes on in the university, interestingly. But what's worth saying about that is that this way of flitting about the means of navigating the apparatus of the book simply doesn't work for most humanities work in the technical sphere at the moment. There is no substitute for the codex at the moment. So this might change, but at present it gives us a good revenue stream for open access books. If people want print and you can charge for it and make your costs up there, then the open access version essentially serves as advertising for that. We've got qualitative studies that show that people use this stuff differently. They use it for searching, for copy and paste when it's online, when they want to cite something. If they're still going to buy print, that's a route. The University of Adelaide Press and Monash University Publishing and Open Book Publishers are good examples of entities undertaking that mode. The other way we can do this is institutional subsidy, and if you've been following the American scene, you might have seen the Association of American University Presses, the ARL, and Mellon's joint proposal for a first book subvention that falls under this category. And essentially this is saying, well, let's get support for a publisher's entity from a university. So you're not paying for your researchers as you might in a BPC route. Instead you're saying we'll subsidise the press's operations. And a good example of this is Open Humanities Press, which is a scholar-led enterprise with strategic partnerships with the University of Michigan, UC Irving, UCLA Library, and the Public Knowledge Project. Next up, we have a freemium system that we can adopt. Now this has slight problems because it means that the open access version has to inherently be the poor relation of the version you're paying for. But the idea here is that the value-added features appear in a version you pay for, and if that's enough, and you're really demonstrating that you're doing good things, then people will buy that. So at the moment, print actually is a kind of freemium model. If people think that is a value-added proposition, they're still willing to pay for it. But we're primarily talking about digital here. So Open Edition in France is a good example of this, where a very basic HTML version is available. If you want the PDF or you want richer forms, hypertext linked HTML versions, you can pay, and they seem to cover their costs at present through that. And last but not least, there are some interesting collective funding models emerging here. I'm going to talk about two of those. First is Knowledge Unlatched. For those who don't know, this was Frances Pinter's initiative based on an article she wrote with Hugh Look in 2010. But Adrian Johns actually traces it back to modes of patronage in the 18th century. The idea here was that she'd get a consortium of libraries together to underwrite the base title cost of producing a book, what would otherwise be a BPC. So again, you're not paying directly for your own researchers, you're working together to lower the cost, because when you pool your resources, everyone can pay less. And eventually she managed to get 28 new books from 13 renowned scholarly publishers liberated by these means. That's Amsterdam, UP, Bloomsbury Academic, Brill, CUP, De Gruyter, Duke, Edinburgh University Press, Liverpool University Press, MUP, Purdue, and the list goes on anyway, you can look it up. She got 300 libraries to participate in that, giving an average cost per book of $40 per institution. That's far cheaper than you could afford to get a print copy of those specialist monographs. There are concerns over the selection procedure, and I don't know how it rolls forward, but it was an innovative model, and she proved the viability of that working. Last but not least, this is a slight plug, so I'm not going to dwell on it for too long. I'm launching an initiative called the Open Library of Humanities that primarily focuses on journals. We're thinking that at the moment, publishers continually claim that the monograph sphere is cross-subsidised by the journal sphere. What if we did the same, inverting it in the same collective subsidy way? We're about to open financial contributions, but we have a good evidence base showing we should be able to get several hundred libraries to contribute to our project. If they want to start cross-subsidising books, we have potential arrangements with CUP, OUP and HUP, Harvard University Press, under negotiation for that mode to deliver books as well. So I'm going to stop there. That's, I hope, the right kind of time, 20 minutes bang on. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that was interesting.